Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to episode number 5 of Beeps Media. I was able to do 3 whole episodes before I'm going to be returning to the well of the White Sox, unfortunately. But this is all very therapeutic for me anyway, maybe for some of the listeners as well. I'm your host, Nick Schaefer, and this is as I said, Beeps Media, the podcast with the worst production values and the best guests. I think that's what I'm going to go with. And I'm very happy to have our first guest of the new year with me today. He is the editor-in-chief of Sox on 35th and I believe Diamond Digest. Are you EIC for both? This is
Yes, I
Jordan
am.
Lazowski. Jordan,
Hey,
welcome.
thanks for having me, Nick. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Nick. Yes, it is editor in chief of both of those. So they keep me
Nice.
plenty
Okay.
busy.
Yeah. EIC is something I've never handled solely, and I'm hoping to keep it that way. I guess technically here I can take whatever title I like, but yeah. Over I think it was like New Year's Eve or something like that. Jordan, you tweeted something. I don't actually have the exact tweet in front of me, but you raised the question as people were, I think, reacting to the White Sox signing Chris Flexen. You asked
Mhm.
something along the lines of, "Does anybody have an idea of what the long-term plan is here?" And that got me thinking because I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what they're trying to do right now. But I don't know what the 5-year plan is. And
Right.
I was curious if you had anything in particular that had prompted you to raise that question, and if you've developed any hypotheses that might answer that yet.
Yeah, the question becomes it's everything that's happened this offseason for the White Sox has all been 1 year deals except for Eric Fetty, who's a 2 year signing. So for me at least, it leads to the natural question of okay, what's the plan here?
Hmm.
And in response to that tweet, I got a lot of just, oh, they're trying to improve the defense, they're trying to rebuild the culture. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but that's not a plan because if you're putting the emphasis on culture and defense on 1 year deals, then this team could have the best culture in the history of baseball. It wouldn't matter because they're half of these 1 year deals probably aren't coming back next year. So what becomes the plan then? The pitching or the defense side of things too. Yes, pitching will absolutely benefit for 1 year. But then what? Who follows these guys? And I guess, yes, pitching and culture is a vision. I get that. But they've done nothing to say, here's who these veterans are going to be passing down these leadership responsibilities to. Is this going to be Benintendi, Robert, Vaughn? Like, are these the next wave of leaders that we're teaching?
Little baby
That's where
Andrew's got to learn how to play at age 31
exactly.
or whatever.
Exactly. And it's like, well, he's in his mid 30s, but then you turn around and you're like, are you going to entrust rookies to do that? Like, let's just say Colson Montgomery comes up. Are you now going to make him the leader of the clubhouse when he's still learning how to play the major league level? It became a larger question of, where do, and I've always preached patience. I'm always like, yes, wait, there's more to the offseason. I get that. But at a certain point, you have to do something that gives fans a sense of, oh, I see where this is going now, 2, 3, 4 years down the line. I still don't feel like we're there yet.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think if you come from the approach of, I'm trying to think of ways I could articulate where they might be coming from that I wouldn't just laugh at. Like the culture thing to me has driven me crazy. I mean, even I think rank and file White Sox fans who don't let this bother them as much as it bothers me have also made
Right.
like a running joke about Grifal's quotes about, oh, well, we're trying to install a culture and we're trying to teach people how to do their job the right way. And I've always thought that was kind of a red herring. I've always thought that was the trying to appease the casual fan, because I think a lot of casual fans are happy to attribute the failure of a major league player or team, pick your sport, to like a lack of effort. And I think that's much less frequently accurate than people say it is. I think there are players who don't, who aren't like Jimmy Butler lunatics who are going to work like, get every drop of talent wrung out of their bodies. But like, there's very few players, I think, where it's really noticeably, it's like, yeah, they don't want to be here. They don't care. Like, that's just, you don't get to the majors if that's who you
Mm-hmm.
are. I, 99 times out of 100. And so it seems like this like thing, oh, they aren't hustling, they're not running the bases hard. I'm like, well, how much does that really matter? Like they can't hit. So I don't
Right.
really like who cares.
Right.
So
And
I always
to your credit, though, too, that has appeased a lot of those quote unquote more casual
it's
fans.
true.
That has
They're good at
absolutely
this.
appeased them. How many times have I heard defense and culture in response to that tweet? And that's just a very small subsection of fans, but a very small subsection can start to build on a larger subsection. So it's not like it's incredibly out of the ordinary to say yes, it's trying to appease them, but it also feels like for some it's working, which is part of the problem. To your point,
Yeah, no, that's certainly demoralizing. And I guess if you're maybe it's a form of denial as a fan where you hear like, oh, if we just change, if we put like a chore wheel up on the wall or something, and get everybody trying their hardest, that'll fix it. That'll fix the
right?
structural rot that's been dragging this franchise down for um I don't know. I mean, most of your adult, certainly most of my adult
I'm
life. I think
only
I'm older than you.
26, so yeah,
Yeah.
most of
So,
it.
oh gosh, yeah. No, you may not. You have much memory of the before time when they could actually like develop a hitter. Um, but so yeah, I wonder about that. I think I think I was one of the people kind of in your mentions on that saying defense and culture is. I mean, not culture so much, but defense in the sense of maybe the plan is we supercharge a bunch of pitchers like surface level stats by putting them in front of a good defense next year.
hmm
Improving the defense is cheap. The defense was bad, so we'll make the defense good. Um, Maybe we'll get these rental pitchers polished up, looking a lot better, look like bounce back candidates, and then flip them for players we can use down the road. That is a way to get some peripheral talent into the organization that you wouldn't otherwise. And it kind of always bothered me about Hahn was he would never sign rentals that just to do it, just to have them on hand to trade them later. He just wouldn't do that. They were always like plan A for a position. And then if they were bad, that was like, there goes that season.
It.
So, um, but yeah, I don't actually, I mean, do you, so I guess the other part of my question was, do you think they have a plan, or do you think it's just, it will get the team to 75 wins, and then we can say, look, we got 13 wins better, and that'll
Right,
be it.
that's what I'm worried about too. There was one person who said something, and I mentioned, forget who it was, along the effect of kind of exactly what you're saying. The previous regime did not know how to work on the margins with these types of players,
Mhm.
so maybe this is a sign of them trying to use this time to learn how to do that, which is just fine. I mean, at the end of the day, it shouldn't be hard to say, okay, we need defense. Who are the cheapest players and who have the best defensive metrics? Like I think we could all do that. And I think if you put together any off-season plan, some of these players you at least looked at, like, oh yeah, Paul DeJong, cheap, might have some home run power, but at the very least he plays defense really well.
Mhm.
Nicky Lopez makes sense. He just kind of jumps around everywhere, but still high defensive value. And that's fine to work on the margins like that. And I think a lot of fans have been not happy, but appeased at times this offseason because they said, oh, we have depth now. The problem is they don't have good players. So we have the opposite
Do
problem
you
of what
need
we thought
those?
we had. Right, exactly. It's like, oh, in the last regime, they thought they had good players. And on paper, I think we all thought, at least early on, like, oh, they have the good players, but the depth continues to hurt them. Now we've done it the opposite. It's like, wow, we have all this great depth, but nobody good. Like, great. We've got a lot of deep depth in starting pitching and a strong defense. How's that going to matter when all the balls are flying over the fence because of the value of these pitchers?
Yeah.
So it's a long way of saying I'm sure there is some sort of plan. I do think an emphasis on veteran leaders and defense says that they're going to be a team that moving forward, maybe when the free agent market's a little bit better, prioritizes defensive value. But until they make a move or two that signifies here's the long-term plan, like at third base, for example, I think is a great example. Moncada's probably not going to be worth $25 million next year. So it's fair to assume third base is going to have a hole next season. Is that something you consider taken care of this offseason? Is that something that you at least consider looking around and saying, hey, let's trade for third baseman? What's your plan for something like that? Right field's another example. Are they planning to run Oscar Colas out there again, which is fine? Might have gotten an unfair shake, but are you sure about that type thing? So it's a combination of, yes, there are some stopgaps, like DeYoung for Colson Montgomery, totally get that.
Mhm.
But a lot of other position stopgaps have been signed for. There's not a clear future at that position, which still remains the issue for me. So it's like partially a vision, but still something that feels unfinished, I guess is the word for it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like I think the most charitable and plausible. Like, let's say Chris Getz is a genius. Like, let's say he's like really good at this, and he's brought in good people. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm gonna mess up whether it's Jesse or Josh Barfield, because one is a father, one's a son. Um, let's say Barfield's amazing at this, and they finally build up the infrastructure. They do the player development and all that stuff, um, that they never have done, the hitting coaching, and maybe they would say, look, we're the Rays change on the fly all the time. You think Blake Snell is this like homegrown ace who's going to be here for a while. They decide, hey, here's the peak of his value. We're going to convert him into something else. Roll the plan forward. The roster morphs and changes as long as we're always have more talent today than we did yesterday. And you can, if you have the skill to do that, that's tough. It's tricky to do. I mean, the Yankees brought in DJ LeMahieu instead of Bryce Harper, and it looked really cool for like 1 year. And now you need to find DJ LeMahieu every other year, instead of just shoving Harper into a roster slot and moving on to the next problem for the next decade. So that's like the rosiest spin I can put on this. I don't know, other than being really active with the bargain bin. Like, let's roll through these, like Chris Flexen, he found some cool stuff in Korea. Let's like, tinker with his arsenal again, and maybe we can polish him up and flip him for something long term, and just do that 50 times a year and just keep trying it and keep adding and adding and adding. I mean, I prefer that to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't, until they show that they've built up the evaluative and developmental infrastructure to do it effectively, I'm going to be really skeptical. And this is all assuming, Reinsdorf will not spend, and I think he's falling further behind, to be honest. I was actually really excited for Lee from Korea. I think he signed with the Giants for like $113 million. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, they were never going to be close to
Even
that. They were never
close,
going to do
right?
that. Yeah. So I don't know. That's the rosiest spin I can put on it, other than just signing everybody who's ever played for the Royals. Um,
But the
and
problem there becomes, though, if it is truly going to be this long-term development plan, fine, like really focusing in on player development and really getting things right there, fine, totally fine with me. It's something that's been totally ignored for years in this organization. Fine, I'm totally good with that. But communicate that in some way to fans, even if you have to read between the lines like Rick Hahn used to do. Like, even if you're not giving me a straight answer, give me something to work with. A bunch of 1-year deals tends to lean, you're either, yep, just trying to arbitrarily inflate the win total, or you're trying to perhaps make this a longer rebuild. If that's the case, then don't come out in your initial press conferences and say, well, we think we're in it because we can win because the AL Central is so easy to win. Like, that's not going to jive well with fans who buy that. And
mm-mm.
then you change your tune later because you were supposed to be the guy with the pulse on the organization. You were supposed to know whether or not this team could win immediately. And I mean, you came in, you cleared house, you did a whole bunch of different things apparently, which you had your pulse on it. Fair. You knew it was wrong. Then why did you say what you said early on? Like, it's that sort of. I mean, fans are like, well, you can't take them at their word. I'm like, yes, but some people do. Like, I think some people know not to take someone at their word when they have to fight for their job, essentially, or make a good first impression. I think we've all learned from our mistakes there. But that doesn't mean other people don't read into that. Like, you're gonna harm your standing with fans somewhere along the line when you do that. My only
Yeah,
other concern with it becomes too, when you're flipping guys, like how much do teams read into like because two of the guys, Soroka and Flexen, pitch to contact guys. So it makes sense. Now you're trying to improve your defense. Then it's maybe like you had their stats essentially. How many teams buy into that? How many teams don't look further and say, "Oh wow, you had a 2.50 ERA with the Sox, but my defense isn't great, and I know you aren't striking guys out, so I'm a little concerned about your long-term abilities. So I'm not going to give you that great of a return for this asset." So it's like the ceiling on some of the asset trades is going to be harder too with it all.
Yeah, no, agreed. And it goes back to my favorite sports radio thing when people call in and they're like, "Oh man, player X is terrible. We got to trade him." It's like, yeah, the other teams have noticed that he's terrible too.
Exactly.
Jerry and Poughkeepsie or whatever, who's calling in. Totally. I think, and it depends on which pitcher you're talking about. I mean, Flexen's older and he's was never really super talented. I know Soroka before he had horrible injuries was quite a significant prospect, even if he wasn't a huge bat misser. And maybe you say, look, we're a rebuilding team. We have the luxury of just running him out there, and if he's cooked, whatever. But maybe people will look and say, oh, they were willing to prove he's healthy, even though we can't afford to lose those games to find out. So yeah, but totally the idea of being a churn and burn trading machine team, it's a lot of work, which Reinsdorf teams don't like to do. And there's, every single time you're rolling the dice, even if you say, oh, this is a 55-45 proposition that we win, you can lose a lot of those. I dare say you'll lose them 45% of the time. So um, it's not a foolproof plan. Yeah, I mean, you brought me, ironically, we were right before we jumped on. I was saying, look, I want to address some of the Reinsdorf quotes from his press conference last year, but I don't have time to get to all of them in one episode. It's going to be a trickling out over various White Sox guests, but you hit the one that I was really had circled and was going to bring up with you, which is his, well, I went with Getz because he can fix this right away. Anybody else would take a year. And I want to fix this fast. And I agree that you need to say something. Your glorious golden rebuild that you promised is, turned out to be, nothing. So you're kind of stuck. But to me, like you said, the problem with that was his answer to the question of like, why this guy? He was here, he was part of the failure. So how can you say he's the best guy for the job? And he said, well, he knows everybody, so he'll turn around quick. And then all of Getz's first quotes were like, well, I gotta get my arms around this thing. It's like, well,
Right.
I thought you had your arms around this thing. I thought that's why you were
Right.
here. Meanwhile, like parentheses, he's never been a GM before and he has to learn how to do that, which
Mhm.
seems like it might take a minute. So, um, yeah, that quote, it's one thing to do the wink, wink, media quotes, but I think when you're caught in this sort of, he doesn't want to throw Kenny and Rick under the bus too hard and be like, look, it wasn't Chris's fault that he was given terrible players to work with. He could have said that. He could have said like the
Mhm.
player acquisition was awful. He was just development. It's not his fault. That would have at least been. I'd have objections to that too, but it would have at least been internally consistent. I don't. This doesn't even hold up under its own logic. So um, here's my question to you. Also, is do you think they believe what they're saying? Or
I
are
do
they
and I
just trying to
don't.
get to the next paycheck,
Right. It's like I do and I don't. I don't believe it because the first thing Getz did was turn around and kind of clear house and remove certain people, um, and kind of resetting his own brand. But then I do believe it because all he's turned around and done is 1 year deals to make me seem to think that he thinks that this could be a 1 year type fix and they're going to try and turn this around real fast. And they're going to try and develop players as they go at the same time. And it's like that again, that's fine ish, but your logic can't be at the end. Let's say this team somehow wins 75 games and it miraculously happens. You get dead cat bounce on all of these guys. You can't turn around and say, well, we're heading in the right direction because it likely came from Paul DeYoung looking like he did way back near his rookie seasons. It came from Nicky Lopez having a 6-win season again out of nowhere. It comes from things like that versus, Costa Montgomery coming up and being a stud. Or maybe this one happens, but Oscar Colas really coming improving, or Andrew Vaughn taking the next step forward. It depends on how you get there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say that, and it's like, well, Vaughn hit like he did last year. Robert was still good, but nothing else kind of happened. There's no step forward here. There's no improvement towards the future because everyone who made this team successful is gone next year, except maybe Fetty. So there's both sides. So it's like some things they do make me believe that yes, they might have just had to say something to say it, but then why do you say it? The other side of it is, you said something, now you're doing something that kind of matches what you said you were going to do, which is quick fix turnaround type thing. And I don't know if fans are necessarily satisfied with a 75-win team with not a ton in the future coming after it. It's a hard situation for me to kind of wrap my head around because it's like, okay, let's say they win 75 games, but there's still no improvement in the farm system. Are we
Mm-hmm.
in a better spot, or did we just delay the inevitable? Like, I guess it doesn't make us feel as bad about not having a high draft pick, regardless, depending on how bad we think this team is. They're not going to get till 10th anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That'd make us feel better about it. But other than that, if there are no trades, if there's no improvement in the farm, now we're just having these same questions again next year.
Yeah, and what's confusing to me too is they keep talking about the culture, and Getz had that weird quote about how Grafal needed like proper support and education on how to do his job, and that Getz would be the one to teach him. And it's like, isn't Grafal like older than you? Doesn't he have more experience than you? And like, aren't there managers who don't need to be taught how to like tie their shoes? Like, couldn't you just hire one of those guys? So there's all kinds of weird commentary that seems like own goals, but the culture, I guess, is the last thing I'll hit on this, unless you want to chime in once I've said some more stuff here. But the only people that they've signaled they thought were the culture problem were when Jerry came in and said, well, the clubhouse was a problem, but we fixed that at the deadline. So that would mean the guys they got rid of. So
Mm-hmm.
these are either premium free agents that Rick Hahn prioritized, like Kendall Graveman and Joe Kelly. This is Lance. I mean, these are guys who've been around the majors for a long time. If you
Right.
didn't know what their day-to-day deal was, then that's on you. These weren't mystery people. I guess Keenan Middleton is the obvious person because he was the one who went on the record and said these guys are clowns. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they got rid of Keenan Middleton, but it's weird because they were so um, they seem to really target in on these guys that they wanted, and then they turn around and say, "Oh, well, the clubhouse was the problem." As if it's like, well, these were your guys; these are who you picked. I
Right.
mean, who wasn't? I mean, I don't think you know Benintendi was bad for lack of effort. I don't think Gavin Sheets or Sebi Zavala were bad for lack of effort. I mean, the only process story we really got was that Jake Berger and Andrew and Gavin Sheets were doing advanced hitting work on their own, and that the team wasn't even willing to, what was it, pay like $400 to get the travel case for
Right.
the iPitch or whatever it's called.
Right.
Um, so it's like guys, when you can't just, you can say culture all you like, but it's like, what are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? It's like, because you have McGuffey going on in the post game show and basically saying like, these guys aren't trying hard enough. That's the problem. Like, this is a great roster and they're not trying hard enough. It's like, no, I think you guys are just dumb and thought this was a great roster. It wasn't. Um, you know, say what you want about Mankata and stuff and Tim, but like, they played hurt all the time. And if playing
Mm-hmm.
hurt isn't like the classic example of effort,
Right.
I don't know what is. But that's my culture rant. I'm sure I'll be tomorrow morning on my commute. I'll be like, I should have said 8 more things about how stupid this is. But I don't know if any of that resonates for you.
Oh,
Um,
culture is hard though because it's like you. It's not like you can understand why veterans are upset, but you can kind of understand why they're upset. They came in, they were supposed to be your guys to kind of finish off this rebuild, and they got nothing out of it. Like Grandal's a great example. He only had one contract left in his career. He chose you guys because you sold him the pitch of being one of the finishing pieces for this rebuild. And then we got 3 or 4 playoff games out of it. Like Lance Lynn, uber competitive, the exact same way. You sold him on coming, well, you traded for him, but then you sold him on an extension that he was going to be here for more good years with the team. And it didn't happen. Joe Kelly, Kendall Graveman, all these guys you sold a pitch to, but then you had a first year manager who I guess couldn't control the clubhouse enough, the clubhouse culture enough to keep guys in it, and then it deteriorated. So it's like it's a product of the veterans being unhappy. I get that, but what are you doing as a manager to fix that or to guide that along? That's still your job at the end of the day. Front offices have such a say now for a lot of teams in terms of the daily lineup or the pitching rotation, all that stuff. For a lot of teams, you're a big just vibes guy in a lot of ways. Your
Yeah.
job is
Yeah.
to fill out the lineup card, make some decisions here and there, but you got to make sure that everybody is happy in this clubhouse. And that's by far one of your bigger jobs now with how baseball organizations are run largely.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, how are you going to convince the next wave of free agents to come? How you end up doing it is what they're doing now. Like, hey, all these 1 year, I can guarantee you playing time.
Yeah.
Because who else am I going to play? Like, I'll
Yeah.
guarantee you playing time as you kind of finish off the back half of your career. You can be a leader in the clubhouse, help us out here, stuff like that. It's a fine pitch for 1 year guys who you don't have a high ceiling for. But how do you get the next White Sox third baseman in here? How do you get the next White Sox right fielder in here? How do you get the next top of the rotation guy in here? You have to sell them on a vision of some sort. And maybe there's still vision evaluating being done. But if you have the clubhouse culture working against you, and you have the fact that like you're a brand new GM and the last rebuild just didn't work out, how are you going to do this? He's stuck in a hard place. Any GM would be. He's really not helping himself so far. It's kind
No, no. And people talk about like another word that got thrown a lot is like accountability. And I never understood what that meant either. Cause it's like,
of
if it's someone like, I don't know, Eloy or Moncada or whatever who you have a problem with, what are you going to do? Cut him? Like, what is accountability? What are you talking about? Yelling at him in the clubhouse? Is that going to make other guys feel better? Uh, Benching him for a homestand? Like, I don't know what does accountability even mean? I think it just means
right.
benching guys because that's just the little league attitude that a lot of fans and commentators seem to have. I don't understand it. I mean,
And
losing 100
accountability
games is
for what too? Like, what are you not being accountable for? Are you showing up late all the time? Like, what
Mhm.
is the lack of accountability, and how do you solve it by talking to the media about it rather than addressing it in house and keeping it to the team? Like, hey, this is a team problem we got to fix. We don't need to be spewing this everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, like you can kill Oscar Colas to the press all you want, but that's not going to make Sevi Zavala know how to hit.
Right.
And meanwhile, like I hate using Cubs comparison, but it's the first thing that comes to mind where like Aroldis Chapman, when he got traded to the Cubs under the circumstances that he did, the sort of the flagship domestic abuser suspension trade guy. He was kind of the first one to do that in that era of suspensions in baseball. And Theo came out and said something like, "Well, we had a long talk with him, and we assured ourselves that he was like on board and he was going to straighten up and fly right." And then they asked Raldis about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't know. He called me. It was boring. I wasn't listening. Screw him." And
Mm-hmm.
he didn't have any accountability at all. He won the World Series. I, I don't
Right.
know. Like, what lesson do we take from that data point? I mean, maybe just because
Right.
he was really good at baseball. Horrible person, really good at baseball. I mean, I'm not saying I want more horrible people on the team. That seems
Right.
to be
Right.
something that Getz has had a problem with in his sphere before this. But it's just sort of the like, oh, if we yell at the guy who's not good enough, he'll get good. Seems dumb to me. So, um, in I guess some of this stuff for next year looks pretty set, weirdly enough, even though the team looks terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Benintendi, you're stuck with. Moncada, you've got for next year. Roberts here. Vaughn is here. Eloy is maybe here, maybe not. Not
Yeah.
sure. So you got those five. Some combination of, I guess, DeYoung, Nicky Lopez, um, Shoemake maybe, Stassi's here, but like that's kind of the seems like the starting nine. I mean, are you um do you have optimism on any of those guys having bounce back years or breaking out? Maybe Lenny Sosa's here too, I guess, as somebody who could be in there for playing time. If DeYoung is like has a 400 OPS again.
Right. It's hard because like a lot of those guys you named, you already know what you're getting out of them. Like you're hoping Robert continues to be the guy. Moncada would be just a nice way to send him out. I don't see a world where he's worth 25 million next year.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know what type of player he would have. He would probably have to be the MVP of the league next year for me to say like he is worth 25 million on a 1 year deal. Just simply because this team is not in a place where paying him for a 1 year deal is really gonna help this team out. Like, great, he'll be here next year, and it's just again, what's another 1 year stopgap? I don't know. The 25 million is tough. Vaughn, I'd probably be the most optimistic simply because he's got the farthest to go between what his ceiling could have been based out of reports coming from college and stuff like that to where he is. Maybe a new hitting coach kind of helps out, but how good can the message be when it continues to shift every couple years too? Especially from Tim's too, who's now in his third team in as many years. It's kind of hard to make a judgment on a hitting coach when they continue to jump from team to team. Maybe the message jives better with others than some, but in terms of optimism, it's probably mostly going to be heading towards Vaughn for this season for me personally.
Okay.
Just because when you look at what are questions that could be answered by this team this year, it's like, well, is Robert still really good?
Mm-hmm.
Probably. Is Benintendi still the career 700 ish OPS hitter he's been all of his career? Probably. Like, is DeYoung really going to break out? Maybe. I don't know, but he's not really breaking out anymore. He's just getting back to old ways. The most intriguing storyline for me becomes what happens to Vaughn, and then maybe what happens if Corey Lee ever gets any time. I think the
Mm.
organization has said a lot about what they think about him based on the fact they just signed two veteran catchers to play before him. I think they've said a lot about what they think in terms of the value he can provide. Can he prove them wrong? I don't know. He's 24, 25 years old. It's hard at a certain point. You are what you are.
Mm.
So the optimism goes to, I guess for me, anyone who has a gap between like where a ceiling might be and where they're at. That isn't a 1 year veteran, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to part, part of it is the same the Rick Hahn paradox of like if I assume that the players, especially transitioning into the major leagues from the minors, were receiving about the worst possible support they could be. Let's just assume that that matches the results. I'm not saying Lenny Sosa and Oscar Colas were like, Adley Rushman or something in terms of prospects, but like people thought they were major leaguers. Like non-White Sox people thought they were major leaguers. Like
Right.
they showed out decently in the high minors. They had major league skills, it looked like, or major league tools. And then they come up and it's like not only are they not good, they're, worst player in baseball candidates. So
Right.
to me, I'm saying, okay, what's happening there? Can they fix that? Can they actually get some sort of floor in this organization ever for in terms of like churning out competent bench pieces and second division starters to support whatever core you do? I mean, like, because let's say everything works out. Let's say Colson Montgomery hits and Edgar Caro hits and um, Schultz hits and Ramos. Like, let's say you get four new guys around Robert. Are you going to be running out ancient Nicky Lopez with those guys? Are you going
Right.
to be, or did you turn Lenny Sosa into like not an all star, but is he Jorge Polanco? That'd be fine.
Right.
You can win with that. Like, and they've never been able to do that. And it makes me, the fact that they finally did make some significant changes. I mean, Chris Getz was here before that, and I do wonder what his role was in those failures to transition to the majors was. Barfield is from outside the organization. So like that's the sort of vague sense of like, can you improve from being the worst at this?
Hmm.
It's should be low hanging fruit, but they've never been able to hit it anyway. So we'll see. There is at least some change where you could that's the sort of vague sense of
Right.
like, Vaughn should be better than this. Like, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. But
And there are a
it's
lot of questions too that I think we've all had as Sox fans over the years that I feel like we can start to maybe get some sort of answer to, like who really was in charge of draft picks, stuff like are these Chris Getz's calls that are like the Jacob Gonzalez pick last year? Like, was that really Chris Getz?
that was the most
Or
Rick Hahn style pick I've ever
right,
seen.
and then it
But
becomes
like,
like who was stepping in where? Like there were some good draft picks in there. Noah Schultz was a really good draft pick. Close Montgomery, really good draft pick. It's like, wow, seems like tides are turning. Then Jacob Gonzalez comes out of nowhere. I'm like, where did that come from in terms of like, was Chris Getz did Chris Getz get overruled or what was kind of the scenario there?
yeah,
And to a certain point, development too. It's like, were the guys they were putting in the system good enough to ever develop into something? It's like you can't make something out of nothing necessarily. You have to have something
yeah,
as a player. You know, was Chris Getz just not given the right tools or the right player? It's like those are starting to. We'll get some of those questions over time too. I think the draft one is probably a 2 or 3 year one because now it's like, what do they do 2 or 3 years in a row versus what do they do just this year with a fifth overall draft pick? I think it's a little easier to project that one out versus like, let's just say they end up picking 15, 16 again. Like, that's that little gray area, and you're not necessarily top 10 anymore, but you're still not the end of the first round.
there's superstars to be had there a lot of
Mm-hmm.
years. Like,
Exactly.
you took Courtney Hawkins over Corey Seager. That was a 13th pick versus the 16th pick or whatever. Like,
Right.
and you can do that with it. Obviously, I know you can go to any pick and say, oh, I'm going to scroll down and
Sure.
find the good player behind it. But like baseball, more so, I think, than a lot of, than say, I guess like basketball's a draft people get really into. Like, people think, oh, okay, you got to be top 10, got to be top five.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball's weird. It's a weird sport. And, you know, you could pick, 12th and still, you could pick 15th, 20th and still take like the top guy at a position
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, maybe the first catcher off the board, for instance,
Right.
as an example. So yeah, what's Schultz and Montgomery, at the risk of doing the what I always roll my eyes at, of the like, so you draft like, prep guys instead of college guys, and that's good. And it's like each player's their own
Right.
thing,
Exactly.
but it did look like they were doing a sort of different style. They were kind of chasing upside a little bit with those later picks, and
Right.
so far so good. And then they go right back to the like,
What seems like a safe floor type thing. Where's the
why
upside
bother?
play there? Right. Exactly. Where's the
You
upside
just
play?
you just showed you could turn a disappointing reliever into like five of these dudes. Why do you need to use your first
Right.
round pick on him? I don't. Uh, I mean, who knows? Maybe Gonzalez will prove me wrong. But I was like, I saw that. But because it's the White Sox too, like you said, getting these questions answered. Like, would it shock you if we found out 10 years from now or whatever that it was like, well, Jerry already knew he was firing Rick and Kenny, and he was like, "Yeah, just do this draft and then and this deadline, and then get out of here." Um, and they were just like, "I don't know, screw it. Who's next on the
Right.
our little like Baseball America list and move? Who knows? Like, because if I were, I don't know, if someone's getting knows they're getting fired, are you like killing yourself
What's
to
the
do the best
incentive?
job
Yeah.
possible? Like, I don't know. I mean, um, it's not like on when people remember Rick Hahn's 10 years as GM, they're going to go to Jacob Gonzalez as the big, black mark on
Right.
his tenure. He's got like 50 other things before you get
Right.
there. So, no, I'm fascinated to see, just because you had such big organizational voices like Hahn and Kenny out. Um, yeah, like what solve for X, like what's going to be left, what will change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I could pivot to like along those lines. This wasn't even going to be my like my positive hot take. If we get to our like get to those, Fetty I think is an example flexing kind of like some of these signings show a little bit more creativity than
Mm-hmm.
Rick and Kenny have showed for a while. Like Kenny had some cool ideas, like when you were like 5 years old, um, and I was like 15. But Rick's ideas seem to just be contract based. It was like, oh, Liam
Mm-hmm.
Hendricks will give him like $1 million a year for 20 years. Like, yeah, but you just signed the top closer. You didn't like
Right.
do anything clever. I mean, Hendricks is good. You paid him a lot of money. Great. Move on to the next thing. Grundle, he was the top catcher. You signed him. Awesome. Like, great
Mm-hmm.
job. But like, oh, we'll get the guy from who was a top prospect who figured something out in Asia maybe, and we can offer him innings. The Mets can't offer him the innings we can offer him. And
Mm-hmm.
if he's just an innings eater, we're no worse off. And if he did actually figure something out, great. Like I like that signing. There are
Yeah.
some little glimmers that like yeah, Getz has some new ideas that like I don't think Han would have gotten to or
Mm-hmm.
persuaded Jerry to do. So did you want to? I guess we've been going negative for a while, but I think maybe we end on a positive note. Do you want to roll out your negative hot take first for me as the guest?
I'll go negative, and I don't know. Depending on who you ask, this isn't necessarily a hot take, or it's definitely negative, but not necessarily a hot take. I really, really hated that Aaron Bummer trade, and it's not because of the trading of Aaron Bummer. I've had to clarify that so many times. It's not because of the trade. I really hate the idea of quantity over quality trades. I just think, and I get it's like you don't have much as an organization. Let's just see if we can grab anything. It's like, understand why they gave you 5 guys. Everyone's like, they got 5 players for Aaron Bummer. Like, do you understand why they got 5 players though? It's like when you go on like Trade Finder and MLB The Show, and it's like, I'm just gonna click the lowest 5 guys possible to make this trade work. Like that's what it felt like for me. And again, I have there's no reason on a bad team to have a $5 million reliever. No reason for that. So I get why they did it. But I feel like for me, there's going to be some regret of going for this whole quantity thing right before the Braves would have just had to get these guys off their roster for the
Mm-hmm.
waiver claim. Like
It
they
was
were
a
just
40-man
they were
crunch.
yeah, they were hours away from getting rid of at least 2 of these guys. Braves reporters were saying both Soroka and Lopez were likely not going to be on the 40-man roster because of this crunch. All you had to do was wait 5-6 hours and you could have had them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, again, it's not the fact that they traded Bummer. For me, it's going to be more so the fact that they did it in this way, and teams are going to kind of use this. It could use this against them and be like, here, I'll just give them 5 of these guys, and maybe they'll take it and see what happens. Or you really get nothing out of this trade when maybe, hey, you could have gotten one decent guy a couple months from now when teams are really scrambling at the end of free agency, and maybe get one decent guy versus 5 prayers. I really think they're going to come to regret that one simply because I just don't see enough of an upside play to say, hey, there's going to be a desperate team at some point this offseason that is looking for maybe one last reliever that's a little bit more budget friendly, relatively speaking. 5 million is expensive to the White Sox, not necessarily every other team.
Nope.
I just think when I saw that trade, I'm like, this one just doesn't sit right with me. And then the fan reaction of, oh my gosh, 5 players. I'm like, look and understand why that happened. That's the biggest one for me.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because um, it the 40-man crunch aspect to it was so funny. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Soroka's a big name. I think Shoemaker and Schuster had been big names, but it's like this can kind of happen. And, I'm not as on top of the prospect world as I was a few years ago. So it's very easy to be like, oh, yeah, I remember he was like a big prospect. It's like, yeah, but he's been bad for the 2 years since he stopped paying
Right.
attention. Like
And
it
then
happens all the time.
it's funny because so many people just hated Aaron Bummer, and I get it. So like former top prospects like Shoemaker, Schuster, former first round draft picks, everyone was making fun of Rick Hahn for doing the same thing with the Davey Garcias of the world and the Clint Frazier's of the world. Like the running joke was Rick Hahn just has the 2016 prospect top 100.
Yeah.
It's those guys.
Yep.
But now when Getz does it. Just because you don't like Bummer, you're like, whoa, this was a former first round pick. It's like, didn't we just hate the last GM for doing the same thing you're praising this one? That's just like, it didn't
Yeah.
feel like very, again, you're right, former top, but understand why a team was willing to move on from them, especially
Well,
a team like the Braves.
yeah, the Braves don't know what they're doing, so I'm sure
Exactly.
we whiffed one by
Exactly.
them. I mean, that Bummer is kind of the interesting counterexample to the propping up the pitch to contact guy's plan, because his
Mm-hmm.
ERA was awful, but major league teams were able to look and say like, yeah, but that's not really a true indicator of his talent.
It's,
Most
yeah.
people I think would say like Bummer's good.
Mm-hmm.
He's got problems for sure, but he's an effective reliever, and you were able to negotiate with the team on that basis. And like you said, I mean, it's sort of a joke about those old sports computer games where you could just pile up 8 or 9 bad players until they trade
Right.
you their star. I mean, it was the old add up the WAR value. It's like, a 4-win pitcher is not, you don't trade 4 1-win pitchers for a 4-win pitcher. You keep the
One
4-win
pitcher.
pitcher because it's just better. It's more valuable.
Right.
You can find 1-win pitchers anywhere. So I am concerned about that it was just like, we just need to get through. That does actually bring me to, that dovetails really nicely with my negative hot take. I agree. I think if the league was willing to look at Bummer and say, no, we see who the real pitcher is underneath the awful ERA,
Mm-hmm.
you should trade on that basis, and you should try to get like 2 players, two
Right.
like guys that you think could either be maybe 2 guys who could turn into Bummer down the road, or 2 guys who could, one guy who could maybe be a regular,
Right.
instead of stopgap guys. Even if Nicky Lopez is like, you know, is like vaguely more interesting than that type of guy is in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, oh, Stassi, before I forget, I like a creative, vaguely creative addition. He's had an
Yeah.
interesting career.
That was
Out of
one
his,
where it's the other way around. It's
uh,
like, oh wow, I see that team has something I actually need though this time.
yeah,
That was a creative way to go through that one. I did
yeah,
like
and
that.
Stassi's someone where it's like, normally this player wouldn't be available to my crappy team for the amount that I can
Mm-hmm.
offer. He's had some, I'm not trying to say arbitrage personal tragedy, but like, he's somebody who's been out of the league for personal reasons.
Yep.
Which I hope him coming back is a sign that, his son is healthy and is
Mm-hmm.
healthy
Right.
enough that he feels safe to come back. So I'll throw that out there. But my negative hot take is that both the old front office and the current one have been leaning way too hard into panic about having enough pitchers for next year. I
Yeah.
think, and even talking to a lot of people who are smarter than me, and I respect and have more info than me, they were like, well, like, before the deadline, did like their minor league pitching depth was so bad, and like the pitching on hand was so bad, and I was just like, I don't know, like, who cares? Like, who
Mm-hmm.
cares? I think you just, it screamed to me that they were saying we need to prioritize high minors pitchers, and I hate when you are acquiring prospects and going under that rubric instead of who's the best player we can get,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of where they play. Um, Prospects for need is a sucker's game. I
Mm-hmm.
think, as short of the like Cardinals and Rays swapping, when they were both playoff teams swapping, like, oh, I need an extra pitcher, you need an extra bat. Like, yeah, they're both major league ready. Like, short of those narrow situations, you should be out getting the most talent back possible, regardless of where they play. And I felt like they seemed to have this panic, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the Jake Berger trade strikes me along those lines. Even if Jake Ader has some talent,
Mm-hmm.
um, it, all of these, they lean so hard on this, and they still seem to be like, oh, people are like, they need more pitching, they need more pitching. I mean, as long as you have enough guys to get through the season without blowing anyone's arm out,
Right.
are you going to be good next year?
Right.
If you've got some guys that you want to take flyers on, like Fetty or even Soroka, like, sure, go for it, go nuts. But like, why did we go after Eater? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why was it all pitchers? That seems like a bad strategy to me. You're an
And the reality
organization where,
is too that you can always find the Chris Flexen type players. Like you can sign 4 or 5 of those guys that will probably be enough to fill out a 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 in a rotation. Like you don't need that all to come internally. especially as an organization. It's like Jake Berger is probably one of your best success stories in terms of a bat.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where's the next one coming from? Okay, Colson Montgomery, great. Luis Robert, pretty good one. Andrew Vaughn, maybe. What's after that? Like, where's the rest of this coming from?
Yeah,
And
like
so it's
Ramos
hard to
is
say.
cool, but
Right.
I mean, Ramos isn't necessarily that much higher of a prospect than like Colas was a year ago.
Mm,
Like, not really. I mean, different shape, different style, but on like that type of prospect fails all the time. That caliber prospect all the time. Montgomery's not a sure thing. I think he's
yeah.
got a high floor, but yeah. So this does sort of it's sort of two sides of the same coin on my positive and negative hot take. So it's not the most elegant way of presenting this, but like the positive take is like I think they got plenty of dudes to get through the year. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
like one of the few competencies that this team has shown is the ability to like find bargain basement arms. So like I'm just gonna read you a list. I mean, Cease is still here for now, but like here's some dudes they have to throw at the rotation next year. Cease, Soroka, Kopech, Fetty, Toussaint, Schultz, Schuster, Crochet, Nastrini, Ader, Flexen. I didn't get to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but that's like, what is that, like 10, 11 guys?
Yep.
A lot of those guys are bad to mediocre, but like, oh, and what is it? Davis Martin's going to be probably be coming back. So like, you got enough stuff to throw at this for your 70 something win
Mm-hmm.
team. Like, and some of those guys are genuinely interesting. Like I think Nastrini could be cool. Like I know that, like I said, I was annoyed that they were seem to only get pitchers back other than Caro, but um, I'm not sweating it. This team's not going anywhere next year.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you find some you hit on some of these guys. I think you might, um, but I'm just not. They got to stop with this. They
Right.
got to stop. Like this is the they were 29th in weighted run created plus last year in the majors. They were only ahead of the Rockies, and
Yeah.
park adjusted stats do weird things to the Rockies. So you could argue they
Right.
were the worst. They have never. You mentioned Jake Berger. He's like the first position player they've drafted and brought to the majors who was an above average hitter in like your life. Like
There aren't many. There are not
Rowan,
many to go from.
Rowan was 98, so that's probably
Yeah.
about 25 years ago, 26 years ago. So like, um, again, there's new staff here, there's new people here, but you've got about. I'll throw Stassi in here. I'll say there's 6 guys here who've shown that they can hit at a major league level to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Between like Benintendi's, say what you want, disappointing, but like yeah, he's a major leaguer, like he's fine.
Right.
I don't. I'm scared that they're doing this thing where they're like, oh well, we've got Caro, Montgomery, and Ramos. Like we've got 3 bats. It's like at
Didn't we
least one of those
just
guys
do
is.
this? Yeah.
We just
Exactly.
did this. One of
Didn't
these
we
guys.
just do this?
We just did this. Even if all 3 of these guys like hit their 80th percentile
Mm-hmm.
outcome, like you need like 10 more Brian
Right.
Ramoses. Like
And that's
uh,
something I said too in those replies things. Like they're just what they just want to see. They're going to use this as a gap year to see those types of guys develop. I'm like, great, that's 4 guys. They need 10 more of those. Where are they coming from? Like, who are you? It's like again, you trade Cease and maybe you get 2 more. Okay, great. We still need 8 more. Where are these guys coming from? That's why it's like maybe this is a long term thing. But to your point, I absolutely agree. Like between just a very positive thing and Bannister being one of the more
mhm.
forward thinking minds I can remember in this organization in a while. I don't feel like pitching is necessarily like they have enough to just get through the year. I completely agree
Well, I mean, and I'm checking other just to see if I forgot anybody. I mean, there's relievers here too on the prospect list. Leisure's here, Mena and Vera. I don't know what you think about those guys, but like they've got quantity to throw at this
with that.
problem. Um, Burke might come back at some point. Their approach to hitting has driven me nuts since like they acquired Juan Pierre, and I'm terrified that that's going to persist. How's that for my positive hot take?
I that's a fair concern. It's a fair concern when your hitting coach comes in and he was all about hitting homers with the Angels and stuff like that. And all of a sudden he comes in, he's like talking about situational baseball and how that won the playoffs. I'm like, were we watching the same World Series? Like, did you see what the Rangers did? Oh, we're out of the
Yeah,
playoffs. It's like you were saying the right things before, but now you're coming here and you're saying things that I think coaches in this organization always say, and I don't want you to say them. That's my concern too. So I agree.
yeah, yeah. And it's like, how much of this is you just saying the stuff that the sports radio people like versus
Mm-hmm.
what you actually believe?
Believe.
Um, and I don't think I, I want for what I would desperately like is to have a White Sox lineup where most of the guys in the lineup attack strikes and take pitches out of the zone. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would like that as a general thing. Like
Philosophy.
having as your organizational trait having no effing clue what's coming out of the pitcher's hand or where it's going. Just it doesn't work. We've tried it. We have
Right.
tried. If it was ever gonna work, the White Sox would have found out.
Right.
But that's so. Which reminds me of the Rob Orr. I don't know if you saw Rob Orr at Baseball Prospectus is like Seager metric, which is like
Oh, yes,
the
yes, yes.
selective aggression and stuff like that. I'm like,
Yep.
yeah, by all means, like attack stuff in the zone. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I mean, do you? We're coming up on the hour mark. I'd love to get to your positive hot take if I haven't trampled all over it already.
No, positive. I think the pitching side is a good point. I really like the Bannister, but I don't think that's as much of a hot take. I really like that though. I'm hoping that just based on some of the names that we've seen connected to the White Sox, my positive hot take is going to be I hope the international market starts to take a turnaround
Hmm.
in terms of players they're targeting, not just trying to sign Oscar Colas and throwing all of your available pool at him. Like trying to find some younger, more talented players that you can develop the White Sox way and bring into the organization. I think some of the names I've seen connected tend to skew less of here's this 23-year-old that would have to give everything to, and here's this 17-year-old that might have the most power in the class. Let's see what happens. I like taking those risks a little bit better. I'm hoping that's a difference in strategy. I think Eric Fetty, in terms of just international strategy as well, someone who had success overseas, they actually went out and signed. Like I don't remember the last time the White Sox did that. I think I at least feel there are positive things to take away from just early trends. My hope is that those continue throughout the organizational philosophy, whatever it may be in the next 2, 3, 4 years to come. But at least things seem trending in the right direction.
No, and that's a really really good point because if you think about what avenues do the White Sox have to add talent to the organization on some sort of competitive footing, um, the types of things they have to leverage aren't many. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
playing time to offer for guys who have low probability of hitting an upside, but there is an upside there. Maybe in trades, maybe high draft picks, whatever it might be. But the international market is an area where they've tried to flatten the competitiveness amongst for spending and things like that as a league. And you know, they brought Marco Patti in, and they were like, "Oh, here he'll solve it." And you know, paying Luis Robert a lot of money was a great idea, but
Right.
we haven't really seen much
Yeah.
other than
Other
that
than
since
that,
then. And it's kind of the same idea as I worry about them being one trick guys where I was like, oh, it's cool. Maybe there are some late bloomers that you're catching at age 19 or 20 that everybody else has overlooked or written off already. Like it was worth a try, but then when you're signing, you know, Yolbert
mm-hmm.
Sanchez and you're giving him your highest budget, and
Right.
it's like he's a can't hit. So what are we doing
Right.
here? Thing. I'd rather get away from that. You could sign, you know, 8 or 9 players for what you gave Gilbert Sanchez and probably get a lot more out of it. So that
Right.
is I really like that hot take. It's something I actually hadn't thought of. So very
It's
much appreciated.
purely just based on a few things they're starting to hopefully do differently. Again, time tells, and next time they give a 23-year-old 2 million, I'll probably eat my words. But at least it looks like either they're learning their lesson or maybe Patty's being given more of the reins to say, hey, we don't just want one guy. We want you to find X amount of guys. We'll see what happens. But it's at least a positive trend for me.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good one. I like that. We're heading the hour mark. I mean, like you probably have a bigger platform than me at this point. But if there was anything you wanted to plug for anybody who may not be familiar with your work, who's tuning in and hopefully enjoyed this episode, where can they find your stuff?
No, thanks for having me on. I love what you're doing here with this. I just love the idea of getting people on to have just good conversations with.
Yeah. Oh,
Sox
thanks.
on 35th, Diamond Digest. I help run both of those. I think I have to shout out Joe Binder as always, of course, for the work he does with Sox on 35th. Peyton Ellison on Diamond Digest has helped me out a ton there too. So they keep me busy, but we've got good people who are helping out both those places. That's where you can find me. Jay Lazowski 14 is my Twitter. If you like my like half baked thoughts, because I can't fit most of them into 250 characters, so I do my best. But other than that, no, really appreciate you having me on, and love this
Uh,
sort of style of just a discussion platform to talk to the idea of the day that, again, Twitter or whatever you use doesn't give you enough to do in 250
oh.
characters or so.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I think you definitely fall into my second guest, who was a Cubs fan, said that the White Sox don't deserve the quality of writing that's out there about them. I think you fall in there for sure. So yeah, thanks again, and definitely follow Jordan and check out his work and his teams at both platforms. So thanks again. Hope to have you back sometime soon. I'm gonna
Oh,
pop
absolutely.
I'm gonna pop stop.